I'm live. For whatever reason, it didn't seem like I was live, and then all of a sudden, here I am. All right, everybody. Hi. Welcome finally to the October Jelly Roll Table Runner of the Month. That's such a mouthful. Anyway, if this is your first time with us, welcome. My name is Yvonne. Today, I'm a little bit under the weather. I caught the dreaded flu-rona. That's the combination of flu and coronavirus. I love to be extra, I guess, so I needed two diseases, not just one. So if you hear me cough or if I sound kind of weird, just let me know. Hopefully you can hear me. Can everybody hear me? Say yes. And let me see who's out there. We have, let's see, I see Haley out there. Oh, from Ireland, welcome. And so I see Josie out there and Sue. Welcome, Sue. I see Robin's Quilt Basket. Hello from rainy Maryland. Welcome, welcome, everybody. So here I am. And today we're making the October Table Runner of the Month. Please check your template and check your pattern. Make sure that your pumpkin seed itself, which is what we're using today, which is this piece, your pumpkin seed measures the same as mine, which was a little bit over 5 inches. So if you lay it on a ruler, it should be like right at 5 1/4 from tip to tip. So you have to just check it when you print these things, right? Because some people will have wider margins on their printer. Sometimes their templates will shrink to fit. And make sure that the pattern says cut your pieces 6 inches, not 4, because there was a mistake in my electric quilt measurements because I had actually made this piece fit the width of a jelly roll. So when I changed the size, for whatever reason, I didn't update, or it didn't update it for me, the measurements. But now this is the correct one, and it's posted on the website. I just swapped it out a couple days ago when I figured out what was going on. But anyway, I'm recovering from the dreaded flu-rona, so please bear with me. All right. So let's talk about this particular table runner. So this is one of my favorite blocks of all time. This is a one block wonder because it does amazing things. So this is the little piece that we're going to be working with. And if you want to know where it's at, the template is actually found on page 2 of the Table Runner of the Month. It looks like this. It says pumpkin seed template. And if you chop it out, that's what it looks like. This actually fits very nicely inside a 4 1/2 inch square, which you can cut all your background pieces 4 1/2 inches if you want, because when you lay that piece or you applique that piece on there, then it leaves a nice margin for you to be able to sew those together, okay? If you don't want to cut a bunch of little tiny squares, like 64 of them, because you're not feeling like it and you're not in the mood, you can always make these bigger, and you can take and you can lay 4 of these pumpkin seeds. Once we make them together, you can lay 4 of them onto a bigger 9-inch square, and you can put your table runner together that way. So you decide if you want to chop into little bits or if you want to chop into bigger ones. I prefer the smaller ones because this is applique. So if you're going to do it by hand, this is easy take along work. You can take it with you as you go. And it's easier to manage on your sewing machine, especially if you have a small throat on your sewing machine. Then you can spin this little piece in there as you sew around. So I find that for me, this size is more manageable than this size, the bigger one. So you decide if you want to cut them 9-inch squares or if you want to do 4 1/2. But for this purpose, for this demo, I'm going to show you how to do 4 1/2. All right. Now I said there's 2 ways. If you notice, the template has a notation, so I'm going to show you that. It says add a seam allowance around the pumpkin seed shape for freezer paper method. If you're going to be doing needle turn, you cannot use jelly roll strips for this because this template is a little bit wide. You see that? So it doesn't leave a seam allowance because I wanted it to fit. I wanted to get the biggest pumpkin seed I could that would fit on a jelly roll strip when I created this template. So if you're going to do needle turn or if you're going to do freezer paper method, you will need to add fabric, your freezer paper template looks like this, but you will need to add fabric that's 1/4 of an inch at least for you to turn over and starch, or for you to turn under if you're doing needle turn. So if that's the case, then you're going to have to use charm squares for yours instead of jelly roll strips. But I'm using the easy peasy method because nobody has time for all that needle turn. I love all you people that needle turn. You guys are my friends. We don't discriminate against anyone who does it the old-fashioned way. We love it, but I don't have time today. So I'm going to be using Wonder Under. So if you have Wonder Under, this is one of my favorites. I like that and Steam-A-Seam because it doesn't leave a bunch of sticky residue all over my sewing machine. I can't stand gummy needles. So I use the Pellon 805 is what it's called, Wonder Under. And it says interfacing, but it's actually a fusible web. Can you see that? It has like bumpy on one side and paper on the other. All right. So let's get started. Does anybody have any questions so far? Say hello to each other. Tell me where you're from. All right, let me walk you through my jelly roll choices here. So I had a Hoffman jelly roll that had all kinds of really cool fall colors in it. So you can see what I have here. And then I also just picked things from my stash because we can never leave things alone. So I have, this is red from my stash. This is from my stash. I just picked a bunch of like bright burnished oranges and reds. For variety, I added a little bit of purple because I wanted to kind of simulate what you see out in nature, right? A little bit of purple, maybe some burgundy, something that reminds me of all the leaves falling, because I want my table runner not to be just October-y, but it could be used also for Thanksgiving or just fall in general, and it could stay on my table all the way up until I decorate for Christmas, which is right after Thanksgiving. All right, so then I have a golden yellow, a nice brown, some oranges, some things with some batiks with leaf motifs. I even threw this little polka dotty friend in there for good measure. So don't be afraid to use whatever color palette you want to use. My color palette that I put in here is literally just a suggestion, right? So this is just a suggestion. You could change this to do whatever you want. I did put a darker color going this way, and then a slightly lighter shade going this way. So if you're thinking of light, medium, and dark, notice that these orangey bits, these dark ones would be a darker one, and then this would be like a medium, this orangey color that you see, and then this like lemony lime or yellowy color would be a lighter one if you had a jelly roll that had light, medium, and dark. Okay? Handy tools to use is I use a 2.5-inch ruler. I make jelly rolls with it. If I don't have jelly rolls, I like something to draw with. I had a little bit of cereal. This is a cereal box, the inside of it, and I just used that to glue my template down onto, and a pair of paper scissors. So these are my cheap paper scissors, not my good applique scissors, to do this paper cutting stuff. And on my machine, I'm using just 50 weight regular Aurifil thread. I've got it queued up and ready to go, and I've tested my mini Zigzag, and so that's what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be sewing with probably for the demo block I'm going to show you, I'm going to sew in ivory so you can see what I'm doing, but my actual final blocks will be done in coordinating thread, or thread that matches, okay? So you do you, and this is a great time for you to just pick through your stash. Look at that. I have lots of pumpkin-y oranges. I love pumpkin, apparently. I love pumpkin spice, so that doesn't surprise me that I have a bunch of pumpkin-colored fabric. All right, another handy thing to have in your sewing room all the time is parchment paper. If you're going to be doing fusible things, you don't want to get that glue on your ironing surface. And so I always pick out a fresh sheet of parchment paper, and then we're ready to go. All right, so let's get started, and I'm going to pull all of this pile of deliciousness over to the side. I love fabric. Does anybody else pet their fabric in the sewing room? I do it all the time. My family thinks I'm weird. If you pet your fabric, let me know in the comments. You guys understand my pain, right? So whenever I'm getting ready, I just lay a sheet of parchment paper right on my little ironing board. You can put this on your wool mat directly too if you want to protect your wool mat. But I'm using a little board that has feet so that I don't mess up my cutting mat that's underneath here. And then I'm just going to take strips. I've already cut. I keep them usually. Let me raise this up so you can see more of the surface. See my iron. But what I do is I take my Pellon and I cut it into 2.5-inch strips because I do a lot of things with jelly rolls. And so then they're ready to go. And so I'm going to find a really beautiful purple. Let's take this one here. This one screams those last bits of fall. The fading flowers of summer. And this is a batik, so this is pinked on the edges, you can see. This is a jelly roll that came that way. And then it has the same on both sides. So make sure that you're putting this bumpy stuff to the wrong side. With this batik, it doesn't matter. And then I'm just going to lay that kind of centered in there. And I'm going to sandwich it because I don't want to get glue anywhere. So I'm just going to leave it like this. I flip it over, kind of make a little sandwich. And then I give it a little press. Right? I press right through the parchment paper like this. Because I don't, like I said, I'm really picky about getting glue on my iron. I don't like that. I don't know about you guys, but that's annoying to me. And so I'm just going to straighten this out here. I'm going to take my scissors that I have here. These are my paper scissors, but it doesn't matter. And I'm just going to straighten this out again. And like I said, I could just iron directly on there. That's fine. These jelly rolls are not starched for this particular step. If you're going to do jelly rolls that need starched, you just spray them when you pull them out of the packaging, and then you can hang them up to dry. And when they're fully dry, then you can press them. That's so your jelly rolls won't shrink, because sometimes your jelly rolls can shrink on you, and that's not good. So once I get it started, see how it's sticking to the parchment paper? It's not sticking to my ironing surface. So once that's ready and that has started to cool, then I can actually take this and I can just draw. And I can do 2 at a time, 1 at a time. You can cut them into segments. You could use scraps. I'm just going to take and draw right on the paper, just like that. And if that doesn't show up because that ballpoint pen is out of ink, then you just get a good old Sharpie. And it doesn't matter because that little edge is going to get cut off, right? So if I get a little bit of Sharpie marker on that paper, it's not hurting anybody. Now I could have traced this on the parchment paper before I laid it down, but I don't find that any of that is necessary. And I save these little bits for other projects. So if you're a collage quilter, save these little bits that have paper on them and leave the paper right on there. And when you start working on those projects, you have a little bin full of those bits. So you can take and actually turn these at an angle like this, and you can squeeze another one out of there, or if you don't want to, you can just lay them out like this. But you're going to need segments that are 6 inches at least to make sure that you have plenty of room. So just make sure that you have plenty of room for this, and you're just tracing. So I've got a couple of them cut, or I mean not cut, but traced. If you're doing the fusible method, you don't need a 1/4 inch seam. If you use any other method like freezer paper or needle turn, then you definitely need to use something other than a jelly roll strip. All right, so now that I have this, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to trim this with my paper scissors. These are not my fancy applique scissors. These are my paper scissors because I don't want to dull my nice applique scissors for this particular step. And so I'm just going to trim this just like this. Careful not to cut yourself. Can't tell you how many times I've nicked the little skin in between my fingers doing this kind of stuff. There we go. There we go. Super easy. Lemon squeezy. Save these little things if you're a collage quilter. You never know when those little bits come in handy. The smaller ones that are too small, I just throw them away. But if they have a little section like this that I think I could use on a collage or a landscape that's an art quilt, then I save those. But at some point, you got to stop saving and you just got to say goodbye. Donate them to a friend. What do you guys do with all your little bits of leftovers? But don't take the paper off. Just leave them like that, right? So those little bits get saved. I believe in wasteless sewing if I can. All right. So now I've got 2 of these lovelies. Out of that, I could continue doing the same thing over and over and over again. But I've just got 2 of these for demo purposes, and so I'm going to move this out of my hair for a second, and then I'm going to get all of these in the way. So the next step, and like I said, these are 4.5 inches because they're easier for me to manage. And so I'm going to take these 4.5 inch pieces and I'm going to go ahead and fuse these down. So I'm going to get rid of this because I'm not using a cutting mat. And you know what happens when it's in the way? I don't want it to get warped by the heat. So I'm going to go ahead and get my wool mat because I love my wool mat. But I want to protect my wool mat. I don't want it to get gooey things on it. So this is where a sheet of parchment paper on top of your wool mat is helpful. There we go. If you were sick and you need to catch up, don't worry. Don't worry about catching up. You know what? No one's put a timeline on these quilts. And they get done when they get done. All right, so this, I'm going to just take a scissor or you can take a pin or the end of a sharp pencil. It doesn't matter. Just something to help you get that paper off. And look, it sticks to your skin. Oh, I see Ellen is a fabric petter like me. I love you, Ellen. And I have to tell you, Ellen, my best friend in high school was named Ellen too, so maybe that's a trend. All my friends are Ellens. Well, that's not true. All of my friends are not Ellens. Some of my friends are not Ellens. Anyway, once you're done fiddling with that paper, let me talk to you about how I prepared this fabric before I cut it. Now, whenever I have a piece and it's my background for an applique, I do, if it's fusible, I do starch this background. And the reason I do that is because it allows me to stitch around the bits without puckering my pieces. So I definitely starch and press my fabric before I cut it out. And then it's ready to go for me to applique on. Now, if you're machine appliquing, starch is your friend, but if you're hand appliquing, a bunch of starch is not. So one thing about starch, and you see this in quilting circles, people argue about starching all the time. No matter what quilting group I've been in, you have some people that are hardcore, I starch everything, to the point where it's like cardboard stiff. And then you have some people that are like, I don't need starch. Well, I'm a starch, it depends person, right? So background, for this, I starch. For this, you don't starch because you don't really need it, right? So depending on the task and depending what I'm doing, if I'm sewing curves, I do not add a bunch of starch because it makes it hard to ease those curves. So I use lightly starched, so maybe a little bit of best press. But for precision piecing, stuff that has smaller pieces or a lot of biases, for like half square triangles, if you have a lot of half square triangles, I definitely use starch in those applications. So if you understand the construction of your block, that really helps you to decide whether or not you want to invest the time, energy, and money that it takes to starch your bits. Let's see, Chris this is your first time joining us, you can print all of the instructions on the page called www.jellyrollclub.com. Look, see what happens? There's a little bit of bit on my iron. So I'm violating my own rule. I'm going to lay that down, and I'm going to flip that parchment paper over because I don't want to get bits on my iron, see? So I like to press right through the starch, the parchment paper, and that keeps the gooey stuff off my iron and the yucky stuff off of my bits. Would I starch both sides of the fabric? Yes. So for this is a muslin, a medium weight muslin, and I starched both sides. So when I press it, it comes folded in half. I starch both sides, I open it, and then I starch the inside, and I fold it back again, and I press it really hard, and so it's like, it's medium. You see it, it's not super stiff, but it's definitely got body to it. All right, so these little guys have cooled off, right? And you see what I've got? They've got at least 1/4 of an inch from there. They've got at least 1/4 of an inch from these two sides. And they're centered right in the middle. I do this a lot so you can see this pretty precise. All right, so now I'm gonna come over to my sewing machine, and because this is a raw edge, it's called raw edge applique, I'm gonna want to sew around both of those pieces. So let me show you what that looks like. Starch. I use Faultless premium starch. It's called Luxe Finish, which is like it's not a heavy, but it's like a medium weight starch. And then I just give it one spray. I let it dry and I press it. I flip it over. I give it one spray. So not too much, right? Not an excessive amount of starch. Don't soak your fabric. Just lightly mist it, okay? All right. If anybody else has any questions, drop them in the chat and I will come back to that in a second. All right. So for this particular step, what you do next, right, is I'm going to take, and I have a wide open foot. Do you see that? And I've already tested the tension on my machine, and I'm going to be doing a narrow zigzag. So I'm just going to take this, and I'm going to use the needle down function on my machine. If your machine has a needle down function, please use it. It's very helpful. And so what I do is I just align my edge of my presser foot right there where I can get in there, and I'm just going to take a narrow zigzag as close to the edge as possible, right? And so I'm just going to come in. I probably need glasses. That'd be great, huh? I'm going to come in and I'm going to just start stitching. I'm going to drop the needle down like this so I can see where I'm at to make sure that I'm in that point, and then I'm going to come in like this. And I'm just going to lightly zigzag right along that edge, just like that. And I'm going to stop every so often, and I'm going to pivot that piece. I have my pressure on my presser foot reduced, and I'm just going to come pivot. If your machine has a knee lift function, which mine does, but I'm too short to use it, then this is a great time to use that. Slow it down when you're going around those curves. Come in just like this, and you're getting as close to that edge without completely going off as you can. And I'm going to stop as soon as I get done with this one to show you what I mean by that. And I'm going to pivot every so often. And I'm just going to lift it and just adjust it. And if you can see, mine is laying perfectly flat. I adjusted my tension on a scrap piece. So before I started, I took 2 pieces of fabric that were similar weight. One was, see how there's 2 pieces right here? These are 2 scrap pieces. One was starched and one was not. And see how this piece is all puckery? And that piece is all kind of wrinkly. I adjusted my tension until my stitch laid completely flat and it didn't pucker. So if you are sewing and you see that it is puckering either on the front or on the back, then you need to adjust your tension. I never touch my bobbin tension on this machine, but I do adjust my upper tension, okay? So let me keep going really quick. All right, we're getting there. When you get to the end is always tricky, right? You're staying as close to that edge as possible, like I said, without going off. And then when you get to the end, you're going to want to pivot, and I don't know if you can see that. You're going to want to stop with your needle right where that point is, and you're going to want to pivot this piece. And this is where you have to be careful. And then get it at this angle again so that you're turning around. You never even lift your needle. Your needle stops right outside of that point. Let me see if you can see that. But my needle is stopping right outside of that point right in there. Can you see that? And then I'm going to come right back around along this side using my zigzag. So let me keep going. And points and zigzags are one of the hardest things to do. Blanket stitch is very hard to do in the corners. So if you feel scared and you think this is going to look messy, then just give it a try. No one's really going to care if your quilt's not perfect. Honestly, as long as you're happy with it, most of the people that you love and you give quilts to, they're not going to complain if your quilt's not perfect. They're not. If you want to, when you get to this end, you can sew slightly off of that point and then back stitch one. That's okay. I usually do it that way. So I come to the end. I come off and then I go backwards like one stitch, right? And then I'm going to flip this around. And I'm going to check to see if I like what I see. And I do. So I'm going to go ahead and thread cut that. And then I'm ready for the next thing. And so now that I have that, I don't want to pull my threads too much. That's never a good idea whenever you're sewing. So I just snip, and then you can always use a little bit of fray check. Fray check is your friend if you've never used it. All right, so that one is done, and let me bring it over here to the other side so you can see what I've got. And let me go ahead and lower my camera. Ooh, this iron is getting hot over here. All right, so let me lower my camera so you can see what I've got. So now that you see this, I've got this one piece, and I've zigzagged, a little tiny zigzag all the way across. I've stopped right at that point, and I've turned the corner, and I ended up over here. And I'm going to take and I'm just going to snip. So when I have these little threads down here at the end, I'm just going to take and I'm going to give it a little snip. And if you want, you can put a dot of fray check right there so that your threads never unravel on you, because what you don't want is for your pieces to start lifting off of your quilt after you wash it quite a bit. Georgette says, do you match your thread to the background? Yes, I normally do, but I wanted you guys to see my stitching. So normally I would take, and this would be purple, right? And so because I have so many colors here, that requires color changes. And so what I suggest to you, and I have colors ready here for you guys to see. Like for example, this is the gold that I'm going to be using with my gold. I'm matching this color to this thread. But what I was going to do, because this is a time-consuming process, is I was going to make all of the yellow ones first and then switch my thread. Now I match my bobbin thread, the thread on the back is going to be always this ivory color, which matches my muslin. So the only color that would be different would be the top. But if you do that, just know that you have to be very careful with the tension, because if you're using a yellow on top and a natural on the bottom, some of that thread could peak if your tension is not correct. Okay? Does anybody have any questions about what you're supposed to do? So far, this is the step, right? Then the next thing that you're going to do, once you make 4 of these, you're just going to take, and if you look at your pattern that was on the website, you're just going to take and you're going to match 4 of those to make one block. So the block is right where the template is. And so you're just going to take 4 of these little units together. You have unit right here, right? A, B, C, and D. Those are 4 of these subunits. And you're just going to sew them together with a 1/4-inch seam. Just like this, you're going to put them together, right sides together, right? Once you get them all sewn. And you're going to want to match, and then you're going to want to sew a 1/4 inch away so that when you open this, then all of your little pumpkin seeds are kissing in the center. And right there's a 1/4 inch for the other side. So once you sew them together, those pumpkin seed pieces should just come together like a regular 4-patch. Does anybody have any questions about how to put together their blocks? You only need 64 of these babies for the table runner of the month. Does anybody have any other questions I can answer you? I have a new quilters boot camp coming up at 6. So you just let me know. Let me see what questions are out there. Let's see, what size square? This one here is a 4.5-inch square. Do you put parchment on your fabric when starching so that the iron doesn't get gummy? No. When I am ironing with starch, I just keep a damp cloth nearby, just a plain damp washcloth, and I wipe the excess starch off my iron. But normally if you spray it with starch and you let it dry and then press it with steam, your iron doesn't get as gummy or flaky. It only gets gummy and flaky if you press wet starch. Does that make sense? Like if you spray it and the fabric is still damp and then you iron it, then it gets all flaky and gummy. So if you don't do that, then it should reduce the amount of gooiness on your thing. And see, this has little bits on mine, and that's from where I didn't fully cover it. But I keep parchment paper handy because it's really good at keeping all the glue off of your wool mat and off of your iron and all of your fabric bits. All right, friends, you can watch the replay. If you want to know more about the needle turn method or the starch method, there's an entire series called The Gnome of the Month. If you go through all of those months, that was nothing but applique. This is our table runner of the month for October. I've got to get busy finishing my bits. Like I said, I'm behind because I was sick with the flu-rona. Do not catch it. It's not a fun thing. I was literally had a fever so high last week that I thought I was having hallucinations, but mostly about fabric. But here I am. So thank goodness for modern medicine and antivirals. So you guys have a wonderful evening. Get all your bits cut out. Go play with your fabric. Say hi to your friends. And I will see you guys at 6 o'clock live if you are joining me for the new quilters workshop. We are finishing up the next step, which is getting our quilt top ready for quilting on our domestic machine. All right, friends, I love you guys. Enjoy your stuff in your sewing room. Go play with some fabric. Have a great evening, and I will see you guys very soon if you're joining me again at 6. All right, bye-bye. Have a good one.